All right, so today we're going to talk about how do we find the exact value of a trig function without looking at our unit circle. So the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure you have that chart kind of memorized. So if I go to Google Classroom right here, and under Unit 7 Trig Notes, you'll see there is an exact values chart. You click on that. That really is the chart that you want to have memorized. Again, I kind of memorized this because I know the sine of 30 is a half. I know the sine of 60 is the square root of 3 over 2. And I know the cosine is just going to be those exact values reversed. So the cosine becomes the square root of 3 over 2 for 30. And for 60, it's a half. And then, of course, the sine and cosine of 45 degrees are both the same. And if you remember, the tangent is always the sine divided by the cosine. Instead of figuring out the tangent every time, I think it's easier if you just have these 9 values memorized. All right. So let's say we're trying to find the exact value of, we'll say, the sine of 300 degrees. And again, try to do this without looking at your unit circle. You can always look at your unit circle when you're done to see if you were right or wrong, but try and do this without using your unit circle. So the first step is to draw it out. Now, when you're in degrees, that's actually not so difficult to draw it out because we're all pretty familiar with degrees. So here I have my little grid, right? Quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. I know that this here is 90 degrees. I know that this is 180 degrees. I know that this is 270 degrees. So I know that, and if I go again all the way around, I'm back at 360. So I know that this angle is somewhere between 270 and 360. And again, I don't really care exactly where you put it. I care that you just put it in the right quadrant. So this here would be 300 degrees. All right, so step 1 is done. We know that the angle will lie in quadrant 4. The second step is to determine the value of the reference angle. So if you remember, the reference angle is defined as the angle formed by the terminal side. So this side right here, this is the terminal side of the angle, and the closest x-axis. Well, in this case, this here is the closest x-axis, so this angle right here is going to be my reference angle. Well, if I'm at 300 and I'm going to 360, we know that this reference angle has to be 60 degrees. So we know that the reference angle is 60 degrees. Now, the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to determine what is the sine of 60 degrees. Because if you remember when we did our unit circle, our sine, cosine were all the same values in the different quadrants. The only thing that was different was the sign SIGN, whether it was positive or negative. So now I know that the sine of 300 degrees is going to have the same values as the sine of 60 degrees. So now this is where those values come into your head. Well, the sine of 60 degrees, if you remember, is going to be the square root of 3 over 2. So this is why you want to have those memorized. I got to push this down a little bit. All right, so now that we know that the sine of 60 degrees is the square root of 3 over 2, the last step is to determine the sign SIGN. Is it positive or negative? All right, and if you remember from when we did our unit circle, it depends on what quadrant you're in. So anything in quadrant 1 is going to be all are positive. In quadrant 2, only the sine is positive. In quadrant 3, only the tangent is positive. And in quadrant 4, only the cosine is positive. So here now, I know that I'm in quadrant 4. Only the cosine is positive. So if only the cosine is positive, the sine must be negative. So I know that the sine of 300 degrees is going to be negative square root of 3 over 2. Now you're going to follow these same steps whether you're doing it in degrees or radians, but it's a little bit different to draw it out. So in the next video, I'll show you how to draw it out when you're in radians.